I remember when I was in the first grade, and before I was in the first grade, my older sisters, Nola and Beth, they taught me how to count, and they taught me the alphabet, or a lot of them, and we didn't have any kindergarten, so I went right to the first grade. And I remember one day, the first day of school, the girls curled my hair, and they were so happy. I just looked so good, and I went to there, and I was standing outside the door, and everybody looked at me and looked back at me and looked back at me, and I left and went home and washed it all out and went back to the first grade. I felt a lot better, anyway. Not that I was vain or anything like that. I just looked like I was stupid with curly hair. I never had it before. But when I was in the first grade, Mrs. Papworth was my first grade teacher, and she was a good teacher. She taught everything we could do. She taught us how to read and how to write, and that was very good. But Renee Harrison was in my age, and she lived just up around the corner from me, and her dad was the custodian of the elementary building. And one day I was walking home with Renee, and her dad asked about who sits at such and such a chair, and so Renee said, "Who sits there?" And I says, "That's where Ray Miles sits." And she says, "Well, my dad says that he went to clean up the first grade room, and somebody had scraped his poop out of his pants and wiped it on the side of the desk in the first grade room." I said, "Oh man." So we were the only ones that knew, but somebody else knew. But it was really funny that somebody would do that, but instead of going to the anyway. but I had a very good teacher in the first grade. In the second grade, Mrs. Roberts, and the third grade was Mrs. Erickson, and her husband was the seventh grade teacher. And then in the fourth grade, I had Mrs. Cranny. In the fifth grade, I had Mrs. Hyde. In the sixth grade, I had Mrs. Turner. She was from Fairview. And funny about it is, her daughter was a year younger than I, and she came to school with her a couple times. And then after we were married and had children and friends in Pleasant View, where the Jenkins lived, her daughter was married to a friend that I knew there. So anyway, and in the seventh grade, I had Mr. Erickson, and then in the eighth grade, I had Mr. Gardner, and he passed away halfway through our eighth grade, and Mrs. Gardner took over teaching the eighth grade the rest of that year. And it was really sad because he was the principal of the school. We had from 1 to 8 in the elementary school. And so I remember she did a good job, but it was interesting, all of the teachers, and I have a lot of remembers of what happened, and all, and the kids that we had the same kids in all of the grades that we went. A few of them would add because they moved in, and then they would move back out, but grade school was very enjoyable.